Nobody tells you what silence sounds like inside a palace. It's not peaceful. It hums. Like the whole building is holding its breath. All that marble and gold and portrait-covered walls just waiting for something to crack. Marcus had worked the East Corridor for 11 years. He knew every creak in that floor. He knew which chandelier swayed when the heating kicked on. He knew the sound of Her Royal Highness Camilla's footsteps, the particular rhythm of a woman who had learned, decades ago, to walk like she owned every room she entered. So when he heard a different rhythm at 2:47 in the morning, he paid attention. He wasn't supposed to be there. That's the part that kept snagging in his chest later, when he replayed it. When he was sitting in his car in the staff parking lot at 5 in the morning, hands on the wheel, engine off, going nowhere. He'd switched shifts with Devlin. Devlin had a sick kid. Marcus had said yes without thinking, the way you do for a colleague you've spent a decade nodding at across hallways. And that single, unremarkable yes had rearranged everything. He'd been rounding the corner near the ambassador's anteroom when he heard voices. Not the voices themselves at first, just the shape of them. Low, close together, the compressed intimacy of people who were not supposed to be intimate. Marcus stopped. His hand went to the wall. Old reflex. Stay flat. Assess. The door was open 3 inches. He told himself later he looked because it was his job to look. That the protocol for unidentified individuals in restricted corridors required visual confirmation before any other action. That he was simply doing what 11 years of service had trained him to do. He was lying to himself. He looked because he already knew. The man had his back to the door. Camilla did not. She was standing near the window, the city lights behind her doing something ungodly to her hair. And she was laughing. Soft, private. The laugh of a woman completely unguarded, which Marcus had never once seen from her in 11 years of 3-foot proximity. She was laughing at something the man had said, her hand pressed flat against his chest. His hand was over hers. That was the detail that got Marcus. Not the hour. Not the location. Not the man, whose face he hadn't seen yet, and wouldn't for another 4 seconds. The hand over hers. The tender, completely unself-conscious cover of it. He'd been married once. Before the divorce. Before Emma grew up and stopped calling. Before he'd spent so many nights in this corridor that his apartment had started feeling like the foreign place. He knew what that gesture meant. He knew it in his sternum. Then, the man turned. Marcus's brain misfired. Actually misfired, like a sentence that stops in the middle and, never, Lord Ashworth. The Duke of Ashworth. Chairman of the Royal Heritage Trust. Godfather to the Crown Prince. The man who had delivered the eulogy at Camilla's husband's funeral 14 months ago. Voice breaking on the word irreplaceable. Marcus pulled back from the door. Didn't breathe. Didn't move. Stood in the corridor with his back pressed to the stone wall, and his heart doing something medically inadvisable against his ribs. In his earpiece, Devlin's replacement, young Saoirse, 3 months on the job, was humming something quiet to herself at the south checkpoint. The normalcy of it was grotesque. He documented nothing that night. He finished his shift. He walked to his car. He sat in the dark for 40 minutes while the sky went from black to the particular gray that means morning is coming whether you're ready or not. His phone had 3 missed calls from his daughter Emma. The last one was from 11 p.m. He stared at her name on the screen. He did not call back. There was a protocol for this. There was always a protocol. 11 years ago, when he'd signed his contract, he'd initialed a clause on page 7. Any observation of conduct that may constitute a compromise of palace security or public trust must be reported to the head of security within 24 hours. Page 7. He could see the font. Times New Roman, 12 point. He thought about Camilla's face. The laugh. The hand. The way she'd looked like a person, for 30 seconds, through a 3-inch gap. He started the engine. He drove home. He initialed nothing. The call came at noon. He'd had 4 hours of sleep. Face down on his couch with the curtains doing a bad job of blocking the sun, when his phone went off with the tone reserved for internal security communications. Colonel Reeves, head of security, man who had hired Marcus, who had shaken his hand, who sent a card every Christmas signed with both his name and his wife's name and a line of scripture Marcus never read. Need you in my office. Today, 3 o'clock. Not a question. Marcus sat up. The room was too bright. Of course, sir. He hung up. He sat on the edge of the couch for a long time, looking at his hands. They were steadier than he expected. That bothered him more than if they'd shaken. He thought about page 7. He thought about Lord Ashworth's hand over Camilla's. He thought about the word irreplaceable delivered at a funeral by a man who had apparently decided quite efficiently what to replace. He showered. He put on his dress uniform. He drove back to the palace through London traffic that felt, Today, like a personal insult. He had 3 hours to decide what he was going to say. He used all 3. And when he sat down across from Colonel Reeves at exactly 3:01 p.m., and Reeves folded his hands and said, "Marcus, I'm going to ask you something, and I need your absolute honesty." Marcus felt something flatten inside him. Not fear, not relief, something older. The particular exhaustion of a person who has spent 11 years keeping other people's secrets and has just realized that one of those secrets has decided, without consulting him, to become his problem. "Yes, sir," he said. Reeves leaned forward. "Were you in the East Corridor last night between 2 and 4 a.m.? End of part 1. There are things they train you for. Active threat response. Crowd control. How to stand in a room for 6 hours without your face giving anything away. How to be furniture that notices everything. They do not train you for this." "Yes, sir," Marcus said. "I covered Devlin's shift." Reeves looked at him the way men look at you when they already know the answer and are measuring the gap between your answer and the truth. "And did you observe anything unusual during that shift?" The room was very quiet. Outside the window, a pigeon landed on the ledge, looked around with the blank contempt of a creature that owed nothing to anyone, and left. Marcus thought about Emma. 11 missed calls this year. Maybe 12. The slow, steady accumulation of a relationship becoming a debt he didn't know how to pay. "No, sir," he said. "Routine night." Reeves held the silence for 4 full seconds. Marcus counted. "You're sure?" "Yes, sir." Another beat. Reeves picked up a pen, turned it over once, set it down. "There was a camera malfunction," Reeves said, "in the East Corridor. Between 2 and 4 a.m. The footage is incomplete." Marcus kept his face where it was. "That's unfortunate, sir." "Yes." Reeves leaned back. "It is." The meeting lasted 11 more minutes. Marcus answered 6 more questions. All of them true, technically. All of them oriented carefully around the one thing that mattered. The way you walk around a hole in the floor in the dark. When he left, he did not feel like a man who had protected someone. He felt like a man who had handed a rope to a person standing on a ledge and called it kindness. The story broke on a Thursday. He found out the way everyone else did. His phone, 6:43 a.m., a news alert, the headline sitting there like a stone dropped in still water. Palace Insider, Camilla and Ashworth, the affair that has rocked the royal family. The photo was grainy. Shot through a window, long lens, bad angle. It was enough. It was more than enough. He sat on the edge of his bed with his phone in both hands, and his tea going cold on the nightstand, and thought, with a clarity that felt like being struck, "It wasn't me." The camera that failed was not the only camera. Or someone else had a 3-inch gap, and a different set of choices. It wasn't him. He didn't know if that made it better or worse. The palace went sideways in a way that 11 years had not prepared him for. Not chaos. The palace never did chaos. Not visibly. Not in the corridors. It did compression. Everyone moved slightly faster. Conversations ended a half-second sooner. Doors closed a beat too firmly. The whole building tightened around itself like a fist. Marcus worked his regular shift. He stood in his corridor. He nodded at Saoirse, who looked like she'd read the news and was now regretting every career decision that had brought her here. At 10 a.m., 2 men in suits he'd never seen before walked through with Reeves. They looked at the camera housing in the East Corridor for a long time. Marcus kept his face where it was. At 11, he was summoned again. Different room this time. No windows. Reeves was there. And a woman Marcus didn't recognize. Late 40s, gray suit. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm, but from practice. "Mr. Hale," she said. Not a question. Just confirmation that she knew who he was. "Yes. My name isn't important." She set a folder on the table. Didn't open it. "What's important is that we're trying to establish a timeline. Specifically, whether the camera in the East Corridor was tampered with, or simply malfunctioned." "I wouldn't know about that," Marcus said. "No," she agreed. "You wouldn't." She looked at him for a moment. Not the way Reeves looked at him, not measuring the gap. More like she was reading something that had already been written. "Were you made aware, at any point, of any instructions regarding that corridor surveillance during your shift?" "No, ma'am." "Did anyone approach you before or after your shift with any kind of request?" "No." "Did you observe anything between 2 and 4 a.m. that you didn't include in your shift report?" The question landed exactly where he'd known it would. He'd had 4 days to prepare for it. He had not felt prepared, not once, in those 4 days. He thought about Camilla's laugh. The laugh he'd never heard before and would probably never hear again, because the woman who'd laughed like that, unguarded, lit up from behind by a city that didn't know she was watching it, That woman was currently in a motorcade somewhere, flanked by lawyers, wearing the face she wore at state funerals. He thought about Emma. He thought about page 7. No, he said. I did not. He was suspended pending investigation at 2 p.m. Not fired. Suspended. Which in palace language meant, we think you know something, and we are creating the conditions for you to decide whether keeping it is worth what it's going to cost you. He turned in his access card. He collected his jacket from his locker. He walked out through the staff entrance into October air that smelled like exhaust, and wet leaves, and the city going about its enormous, indifferent business. Saoirse was outside, on her break, cradling a coffee with both hands. She looked at him. He looked at her. You all right? She asked. Grand, he said. The word felt borrowed from someone else's life. She nodded. Didn't push. She was good at her job in ways that had nothing to do with the training manual. He walked to his car. He sat in the driver's seat. His phone rang. Emma. He stared at her name for 2 rings. 3. He picked up. Hey, he said. Dad. Her voice. He'd forgotten how much of someone's whole life you could hear in one syllable. I saw the news. Are you okay? The question knocked something loose in his chest. He stopped. Started again. I'm having a strange week. Do you want to come for dinner? He looked at the palace gate through his windshield. The guards at the post, standing exactly as he'd stood 10,000 times. Furniture that notices everything. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I do. End of part 2. Emma's kitchen smelled like garlic and something baked, and the particular warmth of a home that was being genuinely lived in. Marcus stood in the doorway for a second longer than necessary. She was stirring something at the stove, his daughter, 31 years old, her hair the exact shade her mother's had been before the gray came in. She turned, saw his face, and did what she'd always done, did not ask the question, just moved to put a glass of water in his hand. He drank it. Didn't say anything for a while. Neither did she. That was the thing about Emma. She'd grown up the daughter of a man who spent his working life saying nothing, and she'd learned, somewhere along the way, to be comfortable in the spaces where other people panicked. He'd never thanked her for that. He should have. The story's everywhere, she said eventually. She was seated across from him now, the dinner between them going mostly untouched. Lord Ashworth. They're asking for a public inquiry. I know. And you were there. That night. He looked up at her. She wasn't asking. She was 48 hours smarter than he'd given her credit for, had looked at the timeline, at the corridor, at the shift exchange, and arrived at her own conclusion before he said a word. Emma, I'm not going to tell anyone, Dad. Flat. Certain. The voice of a woman who'd spent her life watching him carry things that weren't his to carry and had opinions about it that she was currently keeping to herself. I just want to know. Did you see them? The kitchen clock ticked. Marcus set down his fork. Yes, he said. She exhaled. Not surprise. Something smaller than surprise. The breath of a person who was right about something and took no pleasure in being right. And you didn't report it. No. Because she was laughing. He heard himself say it. Hadn't planned to say it. I'd worked that corridor for 11 years and I'd never heard her laugh like that. Like a person. Like someone who wasn't performing anything. Emma was quiet for a moment. That's not a reason, Dad. I know. That's a reason a person feels. It's not a reason that holds up. I know. You're going to lose your job. Probably. She looked at him with the expression that had replaced her childhood face sometime in the last decade. The face of a woman who loved her father clearly, without the protective softening of idealization, and found him genuinely complicated. Was it worth it? She asked. He picked up his fork. Ask me in 6 months. The inquiry took 9 weeks. Marcus testified twice. Both times, he told the same careful truth he'd been telling since the beginning. The version with the hole in the floor walked around in the dark. The woman in the gray suit was there both times. She watched him with the same reading expression. She didn't ask the same question again. She didn't have to. He understood, by the second session, that she already knew. That she'd known since the first room with no windows. That what the inquiry was building was not a case against Camilla or Ashworth, but a record, a formal, documented record of what happened and who knew and when, and that his name was in that record whether he said the word yes or not. He said nothing he hadn't said before. He walked out into February, which had none of October's poetry, just cold and gray and a sky the color of a bad decision. Camilla's statement came on a Tuesday. Marcus read it at his kitchen table with coffee he'd let go cold. It was 12 paragraphs of careful, lawyered language. It acknowledged the relationship. It expressed regret for the manner in which it became public. It said nothing about love, nothing about Ashworth, nothing about 14 months of a widowhood that Marcus having briefly seen through 3 inches of a door, suspected had been considerably lonelier than anyone knew. The last paragraph expressed gratitude to the palace staff. Their discretion and professionalism are, as always, the quiet foundation on which the institution rests. He read that line twice. Laughed. Not the sweet, bitter kind. The honest kind. The laugh of a man who'd spent 11 years being a quiet foundation and had finally, in one unremarkable shift exchange with a colleague's sick kid, found out what it felt like to be noticed for it. Ashworth resigned from all public positions in March. The investigation into the camera malfunction was closed, the conclusion filed under equipment failure. Marcus was reinstated in April with a formal letter of caution and a reassignment to the West Wing. Different corridor, different creak in the floor, different chandelier. He signed the paperwork. He did not read page 7 again. Emma called on a Sunday. Not an emergency call. Not a check-in because the news broke call. Just, I made too much pasta. Do you want some? He drove over. They ate at the kitchen table, and she told him about a difficult patient, and he told her about the West Wing's particular acoustics, and the clock ticked through an hour that had nothing in it worth reporting. It was the best hour he'd had in months. He thought, on the drive home, about Camilla's laugh, the way it had looked from a 3-inch gap, the city lights behind her, and her hand against a man's chest, and the 30 seconds of a life that was genuinely hers. He didn't know if he'd done the right thing. He suspected he'd done a human thing, which was different, and which carried a different weight. Not lighter, not heavier, just shaped differently in the chest. The kind of weight you don't set down. You just learn to walk with it. End of part 3. Palace in Turmoil, complete.